Hey friends, and welcome to the Tinnitus Manifesto Podcast, where we discuss all things related to musicians and hearing. My name is Chris Clawson. In today's podcast, me and my co-host, Nashville audiologist Dr. Rebecca Grome, have a conversation with a true gentleman and a highly skilled Argentinian salsa dancer who also happens to be a producer of dozens of hit records over the last 40 years, Mr. Peter Collins. Speaking for myself as a musician-songwriter who's interested in sound and hearing, it was fascinating to be a part of a conversation between a world-renowned music producer and an audiologist in one of the most musical cities in the world. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did, and without further ado, the Tinnitus Manifesto Podcast with our guest, producer Peter Collins. I have a little question for you, a little quiz.
Okay.
What do Rush, Bon Jovi, Alice Cooper, the Indigo Girls, Queensryche, Nick Kershaw, so many others I can't even think. Musical Youth, Pass the Ducci. What connects all those things together?
I think they all have a lot of hair, don't they? Right?
And they all have the same producer, our guest today, Mr. Big, Mr. Peter Collins. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Chris. Good to be on your show.
I've known Peter for a long time. One of the great things about living in Nashville, and I'm sure, all three of us know this, is it's just so many amazing, talented artists just live around your corner, and you run into them on a regular basis. And I still get giddy sometimes as a kid. And it's just funny, again, Peter, as when I was growing up, there's so many albums that you were connected to that were a part of my life, a part of my growing up, and there's so many memories I have connected to the stuff that you've produced. And for starters, I just want to thank you for that. I'm very grateful to have you be an influence in my life, even before I met you, which was so cool. Again, he starts coming to my yoga class. That's how we met. And it just, my teenage self was such a nerd, when I met Peter, and I just, wow, it's so cool. I was in awe of meeting these heroes. It's so for starters, Peter, what brought you to Nashville?
Well, actually, it was the Indigo Girls. I was living in Mississippi for my sins with my former wife, and I was totally miserable in Mississippi. And the Indigo Girls wanted to record in Nashville, and at that point, I was recording all over the world, and
right.
Because I couldn't record in Mississippi, so
yeah, but you had to leave Mississippi in order to record anywhere, I imagine.
Yes,
right.
But the one great thing about Mississippi, it's a wonderful place to leave.
Okay, there you go. Fair enough.
We just lost all of our followers.
Yeah, I know. We lost Mississippi.
But anyway,
so yeah, Nashville.
Yeah, so they in 1994, they wanted to record in Nashville. We'd done a previous record in New York, in upstate New York, at Woodstock at the Bearsville Studios.
That was their first album, right? Was that
That's the first album I did with them, called Rites of Passage.
Right.
Great album.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
And then we did an album called Swampophilia in Nashville. And I fell in love with Nashville when we moved here.
Great city.
When we worked here at Woodland Studios, and
right.
I loved the studio. It's a sort of old school studio. They had Liberace's piano there in the studio, and just the room just sounded great. And we had I was doing a record with Nancy Griffith there after the Indigo Girls, and she wanted one of the Crickets to come in to play an I Fought the Law style guitar part. The guy that had actually written I Fought the Law, Sonny Curtis.
Wow.
So Sonny comes in and he brings an acoustic guitar, and I, sort of have memories of the Clash doing I Fought the Law, and I thought it should be electric guitar.
Right.
So the word got put out that we were looking for an electric guitar for Sonny Curtis, and within an hour we had like a 1957 Strat show up free of charge for Sonny to play.
It just walked into the studio.
Yep.
And I thought, this is my town, you know. It's
Yeah,
just,
right.
That is the epitome of Nashville, I feel like. You just ask and you shall receive.
Right.
It was wonderful. So that's so I told my former wife that if we lived in Nashville, at least I could work in this town. We could all be together as a family. So she agreed to do that. So we moved to Nashville in '94.
Okay. Yeah, I moved in '95, so I was a year behind you. We're going to get to, so of course, this is the Tinnitus Manifesto podcast. We're talking about sound and hearing, and that's sort of the primary goal here. When you mentioned just going into the room, into the Indigo Girls and the studio that you were in that had Liberace's piano in it, and you said it was just a great room. What are the characteristics that you look for in a studio, and what do you like, orally speaking, sound wise, what are the characteristics you're looking for in a studio?
It depends on the project. For example, when I did the first Queensryche record, Operation Mindcrime.
Remember that?
I was looking for a studio where we could get a big live drum sound. So I checked out a bunch of places and found a Derringer factory in outside of Philadelphia, a big untreated space. And the studio was called KGM Victory, but it was in an old Derringer factory, and there'd been no acoustic treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I could tell that the room was going to sound really big with a drum kit in there. And this was back in the 80s.
Right.
And I got the band to travel all the way from Seattle to Philadelphia in a beaten up old van to just work at the studio.
This is their first album, so they weren't as known yet. Operation Mindcrime.
Well, actually, no. Operation Mindcrime's first album that I had done with them. They had a couple of albums out before.
Oh, okay.
2 or 3.
All right.
But
trying to remember.
This was the first really big one that they had.
Yeah, when they really became known, when they started getting more internationally known. Right.
Yeah. So that was that. But then, for example, in Nashville, Woodland, it was a completely different thing. The studio had a lot of wood at the studio area. The recording area had a lot of wood in it.
Right.
And for example, if you just did a single hand clap in that room and you recorded it, it sounded incredibly full and satisfying. You didn't feel like you needed more, a bunch of people to be clapping their hands to make it sound good. Just the one hand clap would sound good in that room for some reason. Everything just was sweet sounding in that room. So, you wouldn't use that room to try and get a massive ambient drum sound.
Right.
But so it really depended on the project. And for acoustic singer-songwriter artists, that studio at Woodland was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a pure sound.
Pure, but it just recorded nicely. It didn't feel like you needed to do much to it. You didn't have to put a lot of equalization or reverb on it. Just the natural sound of the room was beautiful.
So that's generally a lot of times your goal as a producer is to try to find the ways to get a sound without having to do it through manipulation, right? So
Correct.
And it just saves you trouble. It's a more natural approach to the sound.
In my later years, that became the issue. When I was working in England in the early 80s, it was all about high tech and using as much equipment and toys as you possibly could. That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I had a whole arsenal of equipment, Fairlights and synclaviers and all the latest sampling stuff and crazy reverbs and keyboards. That was the 80s. And so, unfortunately, when I listen back to some of my productions from the 80s, they sound very dated.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Right.
And I actually took a lot of heat when I produced Rush for the first time, because they were looking for that kind of thing. They came to England to work with me.
And Power Windows, the Power Windows.
Power Windows, yeah. And so, of course, I used a lot of that stuff on Power Windows, and the Rush purists didn't like it at all.
It was a departure. I do remember. I mean, I loved it, and it's funny because this is this is when I grew up. I grew up in the 80s, and for better, for worse, right? As far as how things sound. And yes, it's absolutely true. I think you're right. I know you're right. That they just loved using every possible effect and all the modern technology of the time. But I do remember Power Windows. Yes, it was a different sound, but we love, me and my friends love that album. We, just.
I know the diehard Rush fans, but I think over time they've adjusted to it. So
Right.
I think, and also Hold Your Fire. So it wasn't quite as over the top as Power Windows with the effects and stuff, but Hold Your Fire had such great songs on it, as did Power Windows.
Yep.
A funny story about Hold Your Fire around. There's a song on there called Time Stands Still.
I know it.
And we had Amy Mann come in to do to do a vocal with the lead singer Geddy.
Really?
And I remember asking her, I said, Amy, could you sing it with a little bit more attitude? And she comes back and says, well, what kind of attitude?
Be careful what you ask for there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dr. Grome, Rebecca, do you have any questions for Peter? Like, this is the other thing. I'm out of my sort of wheelhouse when it comes to the tech, when it comes to sound and audio. And I'm wondering if there are any conversations that the audiologist and the producer can have. Do you have any questions, Rebecca, for Peter, or Peter for Rebecca about sound or hearing? No, honestly, I mean, this is the whole point, is to open the dialogue here. So if you, this is a chance to ask those questions you've always wondered about when it comes to each other's jobs.
Oh, I have a lot of questions. You want me to fire away, or do you want to
fire away?
Okay. So my first question, of course, is tell me about your hearing journey. So, people in the music industry just have an excessive amount of noise exposure, but it's also your tool that you need and use to get through your everyday. So can you give a brief rundown of kind of what your hearing journey has looked like over time? Because as Chris has told me, you do wear hearing aids, correct? And I'm sure that was a transition. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me about, when did you first start noticing any sort of change? And then I would love to hear how that affected your day-to-day, especially when you're producing and recording, and how that changed your mindset when you're looking at equipment. So
well, actually, when I was in the studio, the last record I did was in 2019 with Stray Cats. When I'm in the studio, my hearing loss was not an issue at all.
Yeah.
Because I just turn the volume up, and it's always usually quite loud. And you're talking to artists either in a control room, which is acoustically very well treated to be able to hear super clearly everything. So it was never an issue in my recording life. But in my personal life, when I sort of had somebody in the kitchen of the house and I was wandering around and I was talking and I was trying to hear what they were saying, I said, could you say that again? And I found myself saying that a lot. It sounded like they were mumbling to me, and in fact they weren't, as it turned out, and I accused them of mumbling. I said, I'm not mumbling. So I realized probably in the last 7 or 8 years, I've noticed that particular had that experience. I knew my hearing was not what it needed to be. And of course, I put off getting hearing aids because I didn't want people to see me having hearing aids. And so it was very, I thought I was just very self-conscious about the idea of hearing aids being visible.
Oh yeah.
So I kept putting it off. And then eventually, I had several conversations with Chris about it. And he showed me, we had lunch, and he'd take his hearing aids out and show me how they worked and explained, how effective they were. And you could barely see them on Chris, had to sort of look for them. And so eventually I made the decision early this year, okay, I'm going for it. And I tried out several different types. And I tried the ones that you put in. I can't remember the name of them now. You put them in and you replace them every few months. They stay in I tried those and I didn't like them because when I put them in and lay in bed, I could hear my heart thumping through. So
Yeah.
that was absolutely no good. And then I tried some other ones that didn't have they didn't have that little tube or anything. They just went in the ear and you could take them out. And I didn't like, they were kind of uncomfortable. And so in the end, I ended up with the ones that have got the tube and they go in the ear and they're virtually invisible and they're comfortable. They're fabulous with the Bluetooth. And I think they're just brilliant, and they charge up easily and very reliable.
So it sounds like you had to try a few different options before you found something that was a good fit, not only from a sound quality standpoint, but from a physical fit scenario, correct?
Yes.
Do you wear your hearing aids personally only, and then you remove them when you're working professionally, or have you found a good mix of that?
I'm retired now. There's an expression. There's an expression in Nashville. He's retired. He just don't know it.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a lot of patients that come in, musicians especially. They kind of the same thing. They don't really notice their hearing loss when it comes to a music standpoint. They start noticing it from a personal standpoint. And so I have always told patients that, we're looking at two different categories of your life here. One of them is music, and one of them is your profession, and the other one is your communication with other people. And sometimes those two things don't align in one product. So we have to tackle one thing at a time. Did you kind of have that experience as well? Or did you find once you found a good fit, everything is sounding good?
Yeah, the last thing you said.
Good.
Yes, in the studio, as I said, I didn't have any issue at all with my hearing.
Well, that's the same thing in performing for me. Like I've been wearing, multiple different hearing aids over the course of the last 22 years now. And for the majority of that time, I was still playing live. And I would just, when I walked into the bar, when I walked into the club, I'd take the hearing aids out, and I'd play the gig without them. And sometimes I'd have protection in there while I was playing even, but similar thing. Like it didn't really, musically speaking, it was already so bloody loud that there wasn't that I could keep up. It did get to a point. My issue, and I've talked about this, and we'll in fact, I'll hold that thought. Well, let's continue a little bit more with Peter. I actually have a question for you as far as you have mentioned to me that some engineers, and we don't have to say names or anything, but some engineers who have gotten hearing aids or hearing devices, and they use them in the studio and they're thrilled by them. They love it, right? I remember you telling me about an engineer friend of yours. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I honestly can't remember who it is either. But,
okay.
That was quite a revelation for me, and also took some of the negativity out of having hearing aids out of the picture for me.
Right. And
I've always been, particularly talking to you, I've always been sort of, I need to do this, but I just kept putting it off and putting it off.
Well, that seems that's a trend, I think.
Yeah, the average wait time is 7 to 10 years from the time that you think that you have hearing loss until the time you actually pursue treatment. The average wait time is 7 years.
Well, you're right on the money there, Rebecca, for me.
Well, you're very average then in that category.
I'm so average. It feels so good.
It's so nice to be normal.
Yes.
So the engineering thing is interesting. That's a big challenge. I have one patient in mind I'm thinking of, and it's always the same conversation as people in the music industry, especially like engineers, producers, they're so scared to understand or get the information of the severity of the loss. They're scared to come into the office and have that conversation. And they're scared that if anyone else in their studio or in their professional life finds out about it, that they aren't going to get the jobs that they would otherwise get. Did you feel that same way?
I absolutely did. Yes, I was scared,
Yeah.
and I kept putting it off.
Right. So if you could really look back and really think about what was scary about that, can you think of what
It was
were you really
admitting
scared of?
it was an admission that I'm old and things are, going wrong in my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're in the music business. We're eternally young, so we think.
Right.
Most of you act that way too, so it's all right.
Exactly. It's a license to be foolish.
Yes.
Yeah. What would you say, so for a younger person who is noticing ringing in their ears and potentially hearing loss, what would be your piece of advice on that? Knowing and going through the whole process later and being on the other side of it and being satisfied, what would be some advice that you would give to those younger producers and engineers who might be starting to notice some issues?
I would highly recommend them just go and take a visit to an audiologist. It's not going to hurt them. They can always just ignore it, or it could be a very useful meeting for them. Self-education, and it'll take some of the mystique and the fear out of it. Yeah.
I always tell musicians when they come in, and I'm pretty picky. I pick at people about getting a hearing test when they're in for like impressions or wax removal, anything like that. And I always give them an out. I say, hey, I just want a baseline on your file. That way, if anything changes in the future, I know how to treat you. I don't have to go over the results with you. I don't have to tell you. I can just keep them on file and it can just be there and you don't even have to think about it. But at least we have some sort of documentation of a baseline. That way, when you get your new custom in-ears or you're using hearing protection, we know if they're working. Because you're spending all this money on a new product. And if we don't have a baseline hearing test and an annual, I don't know if it's working.
So you don't have anything to compare it to. That's
correct.
You need that a comparison.
That baseline.
Right.
And there's nothing to lose by doing that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we were talking.
It is like pulling teeth.
Yeah, we were talking last week about that, and just and again, I think you can probably commiserate with this a little bit, Peter. Rebecca was telling me last week, I was interviewing her about, just her experience as an audiologist. And she was talking about how, and we got into how management and labels are having her go sometimes to studios or to rehearsal halls and meet up with the musicians. And I thought, my God, when, like, the idea that that a management or a label would give that much of a shit about their work, about their musicians, I thought that's progress. It's very cool. I think it's great. It's so nice to see that happen.
I imagine that in my world of production, growing up, evolving through my journey of production, that would never have come into it.
What do you think? I mean, would they have perceived it as a negative to have that? Or, I mean, again, was it just because of the stigma and stuff?
Yeah, the old school guys would definitely see that as a negative.
Right, right.
It is always a song and dance, that's for sure. I mean, I have been really, again, pushy and picking at people about it because I see both sides. I see those who are beginning or maybe 5 to 10 years in their career, and they are so undereducated about safe listening levels and hearing protection and just sound from a human, like a medical standpoint. They just are very undereducated. Or on the other hand, they've gone through a program and they've gotten a degree and they have just been fear-mongered for 4 years that if you don't do this, you're going to lose your hearing and you're never going to be able to do your job again. And I think both of those spectrums are terrifying to me as an audiologist. So on one hand, I want people to be educated and I want people to understand the importance and the basics of hearing health. But on the other hand, it's not a scare tactic. It's a piece of education that you can use in your career to make educated decisions about your noise exposure and your listening. So it's one of those things I always struggle with it because I don't want to come across as like, oh, if you don't do this, you're at risk. But it's so important to me. Like, how do I bring that to the music industry without being picky and pushy about it?
I think that's wonderful, and hopefully, the new crop of musicians that would have a more sensible attitude towards that, more realistic.
Mhm.
Because in my day, you were old at 30.
Right. Yeah, well, that's an interesting perspective too, just in general, as far as
Yeah.
this thing that we know of as rock pop music. 20 years is a long time, no matter how long you've been alive. So like
Yeah.
like you said, if you're 30 years old, like don't trust anybody over 30 was a thing at some point.
Yeah.
But in England, where I had my initial success, it was an incredibly ageist industry that I was in. And really, at 30, you were getting really old. At 33, you're pretty much done for.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when I came to America, it wasn't anywhere near as bad on the ageist
Oh,
front,
really?
thank goodness. Yeah.
So it was different in England compared to
Very
the
different.
States? Really?
Very different. It was, you were burnt out, you were finished at a very early age.
Huh.
And, I think I was in my mid-30s when I moved to America. And thank goodness I did, because had I stayed in England, I would definitely been over as a producer. I've been,
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
And again, that was just that time, that era, maybe?
yes.
Right.
That's very interesting, because I just feel like of all like the British people that I listen to, they're all your generation. They're just,
Wow. But they must have,
I mean, they're like great.
well,
Like
they
the
must have been,
original rockers.
well, they've
Well,
probably
you're talking
been dug up for a documentary or something.
It does seem like a lot of the kids. I thought it was, and again, I was in the 80s, and of course I listened to a lot of 80s music, but I love the 70s and 60s music, Beatles and
Mhm.
Zeppelin. And I don't think that's really changed for the average 13, 14-year-old now. I think, maybe they hear it from their parents, or they just hear a lot of those old songs being on TV shows now, a lot of that music. And I don't think, I do believe that the kids today, the teenagers, the teenagers of now still have a deep respect. There are a lot of them who really enjoy that music. They see the value in Led
Yes.
Zeppelin and Deep Purple and whatever it is, those bands from the 70s. And I don't think those bands will ever go away. They are sort of the epitome of a certain.
Yeah, the bedrock actually of
they are.
rock music. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I feel like social media plays such a big part in that. When I was looking at your albums that you've produced, and I was just giggling at so I was born in the 80s. My parents are turning 70 this year. And when I was growing up, I had my dad's albums or vinyls. And then I had Columbia House, where you stick the little sticker, you lick the sticker and you send it in, and they send you like 20 CDs in the mail.
For a penny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like I had music on demand really at that point. But then I was in college, and like, what was it, Napster? Was that the one that came out where everyone got in trouble for copyright stuff?
Right.
Yeah. And then so it was challenging to get music. And now I feel like, I can pull up on my phone and start a playlist based on a band. And next thing you know, all of these other similar songs are popping up. And
Right.
therefore I listen to them and I like that. And then, so it just snowballs. I think there's, because of so much more access to music, stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, they're never going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, from a producer's royalties point of view.
Right. Well, and that
I think you're safe.
Yeah. Well, here's I just happen to be watching. So you, musical youth, you did that song Pass the Duchy, where you were producing.
That's the Duchy, yeah.
Pass it. Okay. See, I can't even pronounce it correctly.
It was the original song was called Pass the Coochie.
Pass the Coochie.
Which was weed, obviously.
Right.
And the band were from Birmingham in England. The eldest was 16 years old. The youngest, who did the singing, was 9 years old.
Okay,
and he was already a Rasta at 9. And you know, so they changed it to past the duchy. Duchy was a cooking pot, like a Dutch oven.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that is something I never knew. That is a great piece of trivia. And part of the reason I bring that particular song up is because I just happened to finally watch the last season or the most recent season of Stranger Things on Netflix.
Oh,
The show
yeah.
Stranger Things. And that song is in the show several times.
Good.
And it's just hilarious because and again, we'll be getting into future episodes. We'll be talking about what they call earworms, right? Those songs that just stick in your head
Get
and never
stuck
go
in there.
away. That is definitely, that falls under that category. I had that song in my head for days after watching the episode. And it's actually it's not entirely unpleasant. It's an optimistic sounding song, you know?
Oh yeah.
And it's cute. It's kind of got its own strange charm to it. But it's just funny. So do you get so if that is being played on Stranger Things, are you getting some connection? Are you getting something from that? From credit? Do you get credit from TV broadcast?
From downloads and streaming, my royalties are infinitesimal. I mean,
right.
It all mounts up, but it's really, compared to the old days, it's nothing really.
Right.
But somehow, physical pieces of either vinyl or cassettes or something are still selling because I'm getting royalties from analog stuff or CDs. I'm still actually getting royalties from that stuff.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I try to buy vinyl still. If I see a vinyl sitting around, I'm going to buy it. So
that's good. No, there's obviously been a big resurgence of it. Maybe that's source of some of my royalties now. So
there you go. Yeah, well, the increase in vinyl sales, there are actually more vinyl being sold now than ever in history. Like it's actually more vinyl. I mean, like the amount of actual vinyl records being sold now is more than any other time, even in the 70s when all they had was vinyl.
That's very good to hear because I love listening to vinyl. And I've been trying to update my CD collection to vinyl, and some of it's just not. It was never, pressed onto vinyl.
Yeah.
It's just
right.
Like the Indigo Girls stuff, the latest stuff they did. They just never bothered with vinyl. It's such a shame.
Are they? I mean, it's still an option, right? That's the thing too. Again, back to what Rebecca was saying. She tries to buy vinyl. Like if they wanted to make a little extra cash, I bet the Indigo Girls, if they decided to put vinyl out, they would sell it.
That's true. I don't think anybody they really thought about it. Because I contacted Emily to ask if one of the albums was on vinyl, and she said no, we never did it. She kind of moved
I'm trying
on.
to think. Yeah, like I just went to a concert for New Year's. It was Goose. Think of Grateful Dead. People started following Fish, and now Fish people are following Goose. And we went to their New Year's Eve show, and I don't know exactly how I think it was on social media. I got spammed with they were going to release the live version on vinyl only. And so, I mean, of course, I'm going to buy that.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Take my money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that was money well spent in my book.
Yeah.
As long as they don't deliver it in July when it's 1,000 degrees out, I'm okay.
Like the record,
you just hold that shipment until December. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's rather like chocolate. You don't want that chocolate delivered in the summer.
Yeah.
Chocolate, wine, and vinyl. Please do not deliver it to me in the summer.
Yeah.
Okay, so Peter, speaking about vinyl compared to digital and this kind of stuff, so you've been in the recording industry long enough as a producer to see so many drastic changes in technology, right? You went from 8-inch from inch tape or whatever to all the way to digital. What have you not given up from the earlier years that you carry over to now in recording?
Well, when digital came in, it was very, very exciting. We all wanted in the studio, we wanted digital multi-track recorders because we could, the most we could get.
Adding. Right.
Yeah, the most we could get on on an analog tape recorder was 24 tracks, and we could sync up two 24-track analog machines to create 48 track, but the synchronization was not so great, and
Right.
problems with it. And then you always have to have two reels of tape, two machines, had to be the same machines lined up properly, synced, and all the rest of it. So when the Mitsubishi 32 track came out, that we had at Woodland, and we didn't really think about the warmth factor and what we were missing from analog. It was just, we got all these tracks to record with.
Right.
And it was only in after some time that you realize that the digital sound, when you listen, it was not as inviting as analog. In fact, when you listen to analog vinyl, it invites you in a lot more into the music. And whereas the digital sound, for me, is it's kind of glossy, shiny. It doesn't have the space in it, typically, that vinyl has. And of course, I don't mind some cracks and pop on surface noise. I find it endearing these days.
It's charming in its own way. Yeah.
Back in the day, when it was only vinyl, you tried to eradicate that as much as possible.
Right.
But now I almost welcome it.
Yeah, because it's a fond memory in a strange way, right? It appeals to that person that you were when you were listening.
It does.
Right.
So much at this point in my life, I'm 72. Things that remind me of my youth and my past are very dear to me.
Yeah. So I have a question again for both of you guys. When you this is the eternal mystery in my head, or I can hear it, but I wouldn't know how to describe it, is frequency wise, technically speaking, physically speaking, what do you think it is that makes vinyl sound the way it does? Why does it? What are the vibratory reasons for it to sound inviting compared to digital? And I'm asking both of you guys that question from your own sort of experience.
You go first, Rebecca.
Well, that whole last bit of conversation about analog versus digital, of course, I'm thinking hearing aids, and I'm thinking, treatment methods, and specifically musicians are very challenging to fit with hearing aids because they love things to be warm, and they like that full spectrum sound. They like a large frequency range. They like a large dynamic range. And a lot of times you don't get that with hearing aids. So it's very interesting because when I think of like digital and hearing aids, I think of tinniness and a thin sound quality. And most of my patients who come in, specifically those with noise exposure, have just high frequency hearing loss. And so we're getting this high frequency EQ between roughly 1,000 and 4, maybe 5,000 hertz. And we're not adding that bass range in. So a lot of musicians, when they come in, they're constantly saying, I don't have this full spectrum sound, and I don't, it's not as warm as I would want it to be. And I can hear the adaptive features in the background moving and changing. And so one of the first tricks I do, Chris, I know I'm looking right at you.
Yeah.
One of the first tricks I do is switch them over to a linear sound quality. So in hearing aids, we had the same thing. When digital processing came out, we went from analog hearing aids to digital hearing aids. And so we could get all sorts of technical on that, but essentially, instead of having one adjustment to the overall sound, now we have 3. We have soft gain, mid gain, high gain, and it's being adjusted differently. And so for musicians, a lot of times they don't like that digital sound quality. They don't like those adaptive features running because it doesn't sound like in their head they remember things sounding.
Yeah.
So it's not only an EQ thing, but it's a digital processing thing. When I switch over to linear or analog, you're right, you immediately get an unfiltered, unprocessed, true sound, true volume in there. And so, this conversation in my head is on a totally different planet, I guess, than what you guys are referring to, but the concepts are the same. So, analog in itself, from the basics of it, it's just a less processed signal. Like you said, you didn't have a lot of access to, you were limited in what you could change. You were limited in how many different stimuli you could throw in there. Whereas digital, your current hearing aids are processing more than what the first space shuttle did on a smaller chip and with less battery power. So it's just a digital filtered, edited sound. So yeah, there's my rant about that one. But yeah, it's just totally different sound qualities.
In your opinion, Peter, same question. Like, what do you and from your technical expertise, how would you describe those differences?
Well, Rebecca's done it perfect. I wouldn't want to say anything about that. Actually, she just nailed it. But
Okay.
I will say that with my new hearing aids, when I'm listening to my vinyl, I don't find myself wanting to take the hearing aids out.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So, I still enjoy the qualities of vinyl with my hearing aids in, but I just think they're exceptionally good hearing aids.
Right.
Well, yeah, and then you probably got a good fit too. So,
Yeah.
we can, Chris and I mean, gosh, how many different hearing aids have we had you in now? A handful. And, we're constantly talking about, we joke a lot about our language. We speak different languages. An audiologist and a musician speak different languages. And so a lot of times he's coming in and saying one thing, and I have to figure out if what I'm saying matches up. Are we talking the same language?
Mm-hmm.
And then he's thinking of sound in one way, and I'm thinking of sound acoustically in your ear in a 2cc coupler. So, the language of what we're looking for versus expectations, and trusting that changing a very small vent on a dome is going to make a huge difference. And so that's great that you don't feel the need to take your hearing aids out. That is ultimately the end goal, is to get you fit for both communication and music enjoyment. But usually for most people, those two things don't align. So it's really challenging. So it's great that you don't feel like ripping those out or making an adjustment on your phone when you listen to music. That's
No,
awesome.
that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
That's good. That's cool.
Chris, what do you think about that? Because man, we've gone back and forth about a lot of things from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, I would say back to the baseline thing where the brain adjusts, right? And I think that's such a huge factor in my experience going through all these different hearing approaches from the different hearing aids. Of course, there's that adjustment. There's an adaptation that has to happen, and that I think a lot of it is neurological more than it's just getting accustomed, letting your brain get accustomed to this different way of hearing, the new frequencies that are coming in. It just has to kind of reconcile all that stuff. And I think the brain does more of the work than we ever think it does,
Yeah.
And that, I often think about this. The quality of hearing aids that I've had has gone through such a variety, but the adjustment has always been pretty much the same, right? It sounds high and tinny and kind of crappy when I first wear it, almost to the point where I have to turn it down or I take it out and it gets annoying, but then I get used to it and then I rely on it. And then it's, I can't imagine it any other way. And then years go by, I try a new setup and it's the whole thing again.
Just
right?
start all over.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And it just seems, I really do think there's the neurology is what does it. The brain bends towards what it wants to hear, and this is where I think it's interesting, and this is where when we get into the world right now, everyone has hearing aid, has essentially hearing crap, has shit in their ears, right? Everyone you see walking their dog, everyone you see doing us on our jobs, whatever it is, people are listening to stuff all the time now. And we all manage to adjust to those sounds, whether it's in ear pod or, AirPod or these kinds of speakers or a hearing aid. right? Your brain knows what it's receiving and it adjusts accordingly. It accepts where you are and works from there. And I think, that's the beauty of all of this. That's what I think is great. That's the power of, using any kind of hearing device. We humans are good at adapting. And that's what I think is so valuable in general, about one of the great things about sound in general and how we hear. We do adapt. And it's the same thing. You said it takes 7 to 10 years for someone to go in to notice their problem, essentially, right? So obviously it takes that long to start noticing it. If you change it quickly, then it's going to be a very drastic thing. But your brain is adjusted for those 7 to 10 years. Of course, it's going to adjust again later when you get something new.
Actually, I was saying earlier, one of the triggers was, when I'd be in my kitchen and somebody sounded like they were mumbling. But the final nail in the coffin, I'm a salsa dancer these days, and people would get in my ear and yell what they were trying to say, and I still could not hear them. That was it. That was the final trigger.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's such a fun activity. That is such a great activity.
Peter is a highly skilled Argentinian tango dancer.
Also, yeah. But I'm
salsa. Sorry.
I'm a higher level salsa dancer. Tango is incredibly difficult.
Salsa, sorry.
No, I do both, but I would say I'm more advanced in salsa than I am tango.
Okay. So we can talk rhythmically. Let's just do you enjoy the rhythms of salsa? Is that part of?
I love it. It's there's 2 basic styles of salsa, where you're dancing on one, which is easier because finding the downbeat's much easier than dancing on 2, where the second beat of the bar is very important. Right. And dancing on 2, and they dance almost exclusively on 2 in New York, for example, whereas Los Angeles was known as an on 1 town.
Wow, that's interesting.
New York is on 2.
Right.
Yeah. So it's been interesting rhythmically to learn how to dance on both. On 2 is often called mambo style salsa.
Mambo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's a bit, for me, it's a bit groovier because it's not, you can delay your body in the beat.
Yeah. So you're sitting back a little bit.
You're sitting back on it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And again, that's the dynamic, any good drummer should know how to do that, right?
Exactly.
To control where they sit in the time.
Yes.
To create a certain feel, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm going to geek out, Peter, a little bit. A couple things. One, can you tell me just one neat story about Neil Peart, about the drummer, Rush drummer?
Well, he was always would, before coming into the studio, he would always cycle at least, power cycle at least 8 miles, which doesn't sound very much for a cyclist, but he would be really, really going for it.
Yeah.
And he'd come in the studio and he'd always want to be precise. If it was a noon start, he wanted everybody to be ready at noon, not a second later. He was just ready to go. He was so precise. He was just a remarkable, I can't think of any specific stories about Neil that come to mind.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Any one of them. What about Geddy? I spent a fair amount of time learning some of his parts when I was growing up in the 80s.
Well, one of the fun stories I
Alex,
always...
any one of the Rush, like any fun stories about any of the Rush
well,
people.
Geddy, for example, the first time I worked with them on Power Windows, we were working at Richard Branson's studio in England, and they brought their entire...
It's just that, Richard, you were at Richard Branson's studio in England. It's just
in Oxford. It was a big old sort of medieval manor with an incredible studio, and Russia brought their entire crew over, virtually not the live crew, but all their roadies, techie people.
Right.
And Geddy was playing bass, and we suggested that either myself or the engineer suggested that he changed strings because he had fairly old strings on. And so we asked the roadie, whose name was Jimmy Johnson, I'll never forget it, to change the strings, which he duly did.
Not to be confused with the bass player, Jimmy Johnson, who is a well-known bass player, right? Okay.
No. So Jimmy changed the strings, and then we decided to put the old strings back on. But unfortunately, Jimmy had cut the old strings off. And this was the first time I'd worked with Rush and the first time they'd worked with me. And Geddy was pretty annoyed. And so the old strings were put up on the wall of the control room with a label underneath, Jimmy Johnson, this is your life.
Oh, that's cold. As a bass player, especially growing up, and bass strings are not cheap. That was one thing I would always save my bass strings. I would never cut them because they were just too expensive. And you could actually boil your strings if you wanted to.
I remember that. I remember
like we would, get an old set and boil them, clean them off, and you could reuse them.
But a roadie's going to clip them off because he's mostly thinking live.
Yeah, and he's trying to stay quick, right? He wants to save time for you guys. Yeah.
I'd have to think a bit more.
Alex seems like a funny guy.
Yeah, he would always, if Alex had a bit too much to drink, Big Al would come out.
Big Al, so that was his alternate personality.
His alternate personality. It was completely different to the normal Alex Lifeson. He became this sort of over-the-top guy, just extremely funny and crude and loud. We all, both Geddy and Neil and myself, we'd all just fall about laughing whenever Big Al came out.
Excellent. And he didn't interfere with the studio stuff. He came out. No. Big Al came out at the appropriate times.
At the appropriate times, after the recording was done.
Yeah, excellent.
And he was extremely funny, and he was an artist as well. And he would, at my house, you may have seen cartoons that he drew of us all in the studio and the various characters.
Cool. Oh, really?
One of the great pictures, which I wish I had, was this picture of a cowboy with his eyes almost crossed. And it was entitled, Sitting on a Cactus.
He just comes up with that stuff like while you're in the studio, he just sort of drawing while,
Yeah, he was extremely funny and dry, but
he does seem like a very, even just in tours, you can get the impression that he's the joker of the group.
Yeah, he would crack Neil and Geddy up all the time.
Yeah, right.
It was just a wonderful dynamic between the three of them. They were like brothers, and
it seemed like it. Yeah.
It was wonderful. I mean, they stayed together for 40 years.
Yep.
Well, actually, slightly longer, but they did the R40 tour.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a miracle in itself. I feel like, if you can find good friends and good buddies and good bandmates, you stay with it.
Yeah, it was remarkable. It was just lovely being in their presence with that feeling. I've never experienced that before with any bands.
Oh, that's cool. That's neat to hear. And you can hear it in their music.
There's always, tensions and dynamics and weirdness in bands that I've worked with, and they never have really stayed together. But
right.
Rush.
It's a hard thing to do. I mean, it really is. I mean, just in my experience, people grow, they change. Your opinions change, your tastes change, and all that kind of thing. And trying to keep that, especially you hear about these, like Metallica, of course, is a well-known, or the Eagles are the good examples of bands that, had some very public disagreements and had to fight to keep it together, right?
Yeah.
They're different people. They become different people, right? They weren't the teenagers that they were when they got together, and then they're 40 years later, they're still trying to keep that same energy, and it just ain't there.
Yeah, that was never an issue with Rush. They just always enjoyed being with each other, and it was, as you say, reflected in their music and
Hmm.
uh, their performances on stage.
Yeah.
So one last question. We're running, I don't want to take anybody's time too much, but I did sent you, I sent you in that pre interview thing. I asked you about AI and this new Beatles song that's coming out, that AI is going to actually be John's voice essentially. Did you end up, what's your opinion
I
on
looked it up. I mean, I have obviously haven't heard, nobody's heard it,
it?
but
Right.
I didn't particularly care for "Free as a Bird," which Jeff Lynne
I remember that. Right.
put that all together. I grew up with the Beatles, waiting for the next record to come out, and just was there when they evolved through their journey, and I was there every step of the way. So all this is just kind of a desperate kind of novelty thing that they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, it's the fact that
Not
they're,
desperate's the wrong word, but
I hear you.
it's
They're calling it the last Beatles song, right? That's, so
yeah.
they're already kind of selling it as that.
I wish
What
they
do you,
would have asked Julian to sing on it instead of done an AI, because he has a
he sounds
nice
very
little
much like his dad.
career and he sounds very similar. So
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's the AI thing. I think that's the
the AI
intention, right?
thing.
yeah.
And do you have any, so it blows my mind thinking about what AI will do when it comes to music, and just,
I'm terrified of AI. I'm terrified what it's going to do to the world moving forward, not just in music, but in every
right.
scope. It's going to take
Yeah,
away jobs. It's going to take away human creativity.
totally.
Uh,
Right.
I'm,
That's my concern. Again, you're already seeing it with music, just the ease of creating things now. There's no challenge. And I think that's part of, again, back to your experience when you were in the studio in the 70s, the work that you had to put in to make a certain sound, there's value to that. And there, you can hear the work in the sound. Whereas I think a lot of times with AI, it's just going to be this, the value of effort in art is going to get lost.
yeah. For example, as you say, in the 70s, we would sit around in the control room holding pencils, and tape would be going around the whole control room. We'd all be holding pencils to create a flanging phasing effect. So, now
Right.
you just press the button on a machine and it
Yeah. And
happens.
exactly. And there's a technological knowledge that needs to be there that you don't have if you're just doing it all digitally. You're not
There's no
working from
human
any kind of,
creativity in it.
right. You look, I see Rebecca, I see your wheels turning.
Oh, well, yeah, obviously a nerd when it comes to creating sound and altering sound. So the fact that you're using pencils and tapes, like, I would love to do that. I'd love to see that. I would love to play in that room for a bit.
And it's a much more
It still
communal
can be
thing.
done.
Yeah. Oh, you can still do it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And it does
Oh my
seem it's
gosh.
more of a group thing too, right? That's so much of music, and this is something I've heard other people talk about, is I'll speak for myself. I've got Logic on my computer. I sit alone in my room. I can play the bass, I can play the piano, I can, they have great drum parts. I can have all that stuff done, but it's all me. There's no collaboration
Human.
happening. And
Yeah.
there's a beauty, and there's a strength and a beauty that comes from the collaboration that used to be more necessary compared to now, where we can all just sit alone and just look at our computers and make our thing. It's great in that we each have that ability. It's really nice that I could just get home from work and start recording on my computer. What a wonderful thing. But at the same time, the communal aspect of it has gotten lost, and the more direct, tangible connection to it has gotten lost, I think.
And the notion of people sitting around in the studio hitting things,
Yeah,
playing things
that's
physically,
real.
and looking at each other and hearing what they're playing and playing off what they're doing, that to me is so important in music, and it is being lost.
You can hear that in the recording, right? You can hear
Yeah.
that vitality
Yeah.
and that energy in the recording that way. Yes.
That's on the professional side of things too. I mean, when we talk about AI and what consumers have access to, by themselves now. I had a musician call the office the other day for impressions, and they're like, well, I can just do it by myself at home. And I'm like, good luck with that. I'll see you when you're done. I think it is just starting to become an issue where people have the DIY type of mindset in areas where you're right. You can go online and do a hearing test and order hearing aids off that, or to get a baseline on that. But where's the partnership in that? And where
Yes,
is the support of
And
having
the
a relationship with
experience.
someone who can help
absolutely,
educate
Rebecca.
you throughout it? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm never going to bash someone or punish someone for making a financial decision. Because sometimes it is cheaper and easier to go do something remotely.
Right.
But when we're talking about certain aspects, I mean, it's not the same as talking about going in, recording a song together, but there is a level of teamwork that is missing if you're not surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded and who are going to help support you on that journey. So
I
It's a brain
completely agree
trust.
with you.
Yeah.
The working with a person, an audiologist, is hugely important to
Yeah.
get that feedback, to get somebody who's really paying attention to your needs. I think it's hugely important.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
The
experience.
human touch.
Mhm. Right.
We might not speak the same language, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah. But that's the bridge. That's the only way that's the only
Yeah.
way it happens, if you start making that bridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Peter, do you have any final questions for either one of us? Do you have anything?
No, I
any
think
more?
we've covered a lot of ground.
I think we did too, and I really appreciate your time. I feel I can't thank you enough. I feel very lucky. I consider you a great friend.
I consider you a great friend, Chris.
I'm honored to know you, and I enjoy all the time we spend together.
The feeling's completely mutual.
And the same with Dr. Rebecca Grome. I can't thank you enough, obviously, for all your help in music and for just helping me helping us sort of grow this thing known as the Tinnitus Manifesto. Do you have any questions? Do you have any last comments, anything?
No, I'm gonna just go home for the weekend and listen to Rush. I'm gonna dust off some vinyls and I'm gonna listen to Rush.
Everybody should
Wonderful.
do that. Everybody
And
should.
Dr. Rebecca, I thank you for helping Chris. As you know, Chris is my dear friend, and to see his hearing improve so much has been a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's
Amen.
definitely
Thank
a
you.
journey, and there's some things that work and some things that don't work, and we're still working on things. But I
Always.
think it's great also to hear that you have found success in your hearing journey as well, and that things you had some support to navigate through that. So I mean, I'm sure it sounds different and it's a change, but it's great that you're participating in this and telling your story, because there's a lot of musicians out there and people in general out there who I think are just scared. So
Yep,
thanks for sharing your story with us as well.
my
Yeah.
pleasure.
And
Yeah.
they're scared and they're missing out. That fear is making them miss out, right?
Yep.
And that's
Absolutely.
you realize when you get a setup how much you've been missing sometimes, those frequencies that you didn't know.
Get
have
on
been
the
lost.
program, y'all. Did I sound Southern?
Yeah.
Close. I don't think anyone in this podcast is Southern, so
Stick with the production.
Okay.
Stay out of the acting. So that's it for this episode of the Tinnitus Manifesto Podcast. This is just the beginning of our exploration into all things music and hearing. One of the beauties of doing a podcast about musicians and hearing is that we can edit sounds in the podcast to give you actual audio examples of the topics we discuss. I bring this up because over the next few episodes, me and Dr. Rebecca Grome will be talking about the physics of sound. We'll get into the basic elements of what we perceive of as sound in music, specifically the big four: vibration, frequency, harmonics, and volume. So check out what's next. By the time you hear this podcast, we hope to have the website up at thetinnitusmanifesto.com and to be connected to social media. As of right now, you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and if you have any questions, comments, or ideas, you can reach us at thetinnitusmanifesto@gmail.com. That's it for this episode. Thanks, everybody, and don't burn those high cochlear hairs.
you.